Welcome to the Bulletproof Screenplay Podcast, episode number 34. Life is a tragedy when you see it close up, but a comedy is a long shot. Charlie Chaplin.
Broadcasting from a dark, windowless room in Hollywood, when we really should be working on that next draft. It's the Bulletproof Screenplay Podcast, showing you the craft and business of screenwriting while teaching you how to make your screenplay bulletproof. And here's your host, Alex Ferrari.
Welcome to another episode of the Bulletproof Screenplay Podcast. I am your humble host, Alex Ferrari. Now, today's show is sponsored by Bulletproof Script Coverage. Now, unlike other script coverage services, Bulletproof Script Coverage actually focuses on the kind of project you are and the goals of the project you are. So we actually break it down by three categories: micro budget, indie film market, and studio film. There's no reason to get coverage from a reader that's used to reading tentpole movies when your movie's going to be done for $100,000. And we wanted to focus on that at Bulletproof Script Coverage. Our readers have worked with Marvel Studios, CAA, WME, NBC, HBO, Disney, Scott Free, Warner Brothers, The Blacklist, and many, many more. So if you need your screenplay or TV script covered by professional readers, head on over to covermyscreenplay.com. Now, today on the show, we have Steve Kaplan. Steve is the author of The Hidden Tools of Comedy and The Comic Hero's Journey, a serious story structure for fabulously funny films. Steve's been in the business for decades and is one of the most renowned comedy consultants in the business. He's worked with companies like HBO, DreamWorks, Disney, Sony Pictures, and many, many more. He is a very sought-after private consultant and coach and has performed comedy-intensive workshops around the world in London, Toronto, Athens, Paris, Tel Aviv, Sydney, New Zealand, and many, many more places. He gets around, let's just put it that way. Now, this episode is fairly epic. Steve and I get deep into the weeds of what is funny, what makes stories funny, what writers can do to make their stories funnier. Even if you're not writing a specific comedy, what you can do to certain characters, certain plots, certain scenes or situations that can help your story have little touches of comedy even if you're not just writing a full-blown comedy. And we really break things down a lot in this episode. So if you want to know about funny, this is the episode for you. So without any further ado, please enjoy my funny conversation with Steve Kaplan. I'd like to welcome to the show Steve Kaplan, man. Thank you so much for jumping on the show today.
My pleasure.
Thank you, man. I've been wanting to get you on the show for a long time, and as you've, like I said earlier off air, it's like I've seen your work fly through my feed so many times, and it's just like I got to reach out to Steve one of these days. It's just everything got caught up, but I finally have you here to talk comedy.
We're both excited.
Good. So you have a long and illustrious career in the business. How did you get started in the business?
I started out as a bad actor or mediocre actor.
Okay.
And a kind of a frustrated comic. I was not very good as a comic. Places asked me never to come back, like not even as a customer. And I was I had two friends who were actors, and I had started doing some directing, and they said, well, we can't get we want to control our own careers, so we want to start a theater company in New York. And I said, great, let me think about it for a second. So I came back to a meeting with them, and I said, let's do something that no one else is doing. Everybody else does serious theater, and they do productions of Chekhov in turtlenecks and expressionistic abstract plays. And I said, let's be different. Let's do comedy. Let's be a theater company that's devoted only to comedy. Okay. And they thought about it for a second, and they realized that it at the time in New York, it kind of filled a niche that no one else was filling. So we started this theater company. We called it Manhattan Punchline. It wasn't a comedy club. We did plays, but we did stand-up nights, we did improv, and a lot of great people came out of it. We had David Crane, who went on to do a little thing called Friends,
yeah,
and Oliver Platt, who's a great actor, and We had people who later went on, like Steve Skrovan and David Fury. They later went on to become executive producers in television. Michael Patrick King, who did Sex and the City and Two Broke Girls, he was in our improv group. So a lot of great people came out of it. And as a young man, in the arrogance of youth, I thought I knew everything there was to know about comedy.
Of course,
I was fascinated by comedy as a kid. I watched all the old Bing Crosby, Bob Hope road movies, Laurel and Hardy, Abbott and Costello. I thought I knew everything there was to know about comedy. But after producing and directing for a couple of years, I thought to myself, okay, I don't know everything, but I know it's not funny, goddammit. And shortly thereafter, I thought to myself, how the frick does this stuff work? Mm-hmm. Why is something funny on a Thursday no longer funny on a Sunday? Why is a script sometimes the funniest the first time you get some actors around a table to read it? And after that, as when you're working on it, the more you work on it, the more you rehearse it, the less funny it becomes. So what was going on? So I started doing experiments. I was teaching an improv class to actors, and I started creating and designing improv games and exercises to try to understand what comedy is, why it works, what's happening when it doesn't work, and how can you fix it. And out of that 25-year exploration came this book, The Hidden Tools of Comedy. I did that because when I came to Los Angeles, a guy who had been working with Robert McKee. Now,
sure, of course.
Right.
Story, of course, yeah.
Yeah, Story. And he said to me, you could do for comedy what Robert McKee does for story. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. Because up to then, I had just been a theater director. I'd worked with actors. I had taught acting and improv. And so then I started to work with writers and do workshops for writers. And that kind of snowball. And pretty soon I was being flown out to Singapore, to London, to New York, to Australia. And pretty soon I'm traveling around the world and doing comedy. And it all came out of the fact that I was this frustrated performer who tried to get his class to laugh unsuccessfully. I was, most people are class clowns. I was a failed class clown. Okay. And
well, it's interesting that you say that because I find it that there are people who are innately funny. Like they could you throw them in front of a room and they could just make the crowd laugh. And then there's people who can write funny, but you throw them in front of a crowd, they just won't be able to do it. And sometimes sometimes you get the magic of both. You get someone who's an amazing writer and an amazing performer. But it sounds like you were more of the writing style as opposed to
actually I was more of the, if you get me in a room at a party, put a couple of drinks in me, maybe maybe a cigarette or two, and I can be pretty funny, but it was getting up in front of strangers and writing material. So what I found was my skill or my gift was not in creating material, but in working on other people's material, and that's why I was a good director, and I became I am a very accomplished story analyst and story consultant. So I do a lot of script consulting for writers and producers and production companies.
You know what? When analyzing comedy, because I love comedies. I followed comedies on even every part of the kind of work I do as a director or as a writer, I always have some sort of comedic element into it. It's innate in me, and I've been fortunate or unfortunate to know many stand-up comics in my lifetime. And worked with many stand-up comics over the years, which are generally the saddest people.
They are
dark,
broken people. Ray Romano once said that if he had been hugged once as a child, he'd be an accountant.
Exactly.
And they're filling even more than actors. Comics are trying to fill an unfillable hole that can never be completed. Doesn't mean that every comic is depressed or has to be depressed.
No.
But well-adjusted people do not go into stand-up comedy.
Amen, sir. Amen. So no, what I find funny is like growing up in the, I'm an 80s kid. And a lot of the comedies from the 80s and even from the 70s, the Mel Brooks stuff, Spaceballs, Blazing Saddles, Silent Movie, History of the World. Some of that stuff still like Young Frankenstein. You can watch Young Frankenstein today and it holds.
Young Frankenstein holds up. High Anxiety does not.
Correct. Yeah, there's certain things that do. So, in your opinion, why?
And I think the difference is Young Frankenstein, even though it's full of gags, is a story about a guy trying to create a relationship and trying to figure out his place in the world. Whereas High Anxiety is simply a series of parodies on Hitchcock. Right. With a disposable story that you if you think about it, you can't really believe in it. You don't really believe in the relationship. Right. So to me, comedy that sustains and that holds up over time, even if it's as silly as Airplane, is always about characters in crisis, as opposed to Scary Movie 4, which has as many gags per minute as Airplane does, right. But you don't care about those characters. They never ask you to take them seriously. They never ask you to care about them, to empathize with them. So that's, to me, that's the big difference.
Airplane is it's on my top 10 comedies of all time. I mean, it's just a brilliant thing. And those kind of films, though, they do hold over time. It's like you watch even Some Like It Hot. You watch Some Like It Hot.
Brilliant. That's brilliant.
And that thing is it's like a Swiss clock. It is just hitting boom and a boom and a boom, and it holds. And how old is that? That was from the 50s.
It's in the 50s. Yeah.
Yeah. So that movie is over half a half a century old. Exactly. And it still holds.
Hey! Don't be ageist.
Hey!
Okay. It's. Okay.
No, but it's still but because
it's a lot 50 years young.
Obviously, yeah. but there's a lot of things that even from the 90s don't hold, and from the in early 2000s that might have made a noise when it came out, but you go back and watch it now, you're just like Borat, which I still find I couldn't believe Borat was made. I went back and watched it a little bit. It does. I mean, I know all the jokes coming, so it doesn't hold as much as it did when it first came out. When it did in that kind of comedy, but it's just very interesting what makes things hold and what doesn't make, and you're saying it's more story and character.
It's character. It's the great combination of character, premise, and theme. Mm-hmm. So that even something as silly as Airplane again has all those three things. Whereas, Deuce Bigalow, American Gigolo does not. Right. For me, when people ask me what's my favorite comedy, I have many favorites. It's like asking what's your favorite kid. But for me, one of my favorite comedies of all time is Groundhog Day, because I think it's an amazing combination of comedy, just pure laughs. Great performance by Andy McDowell and Bill Murray, but it's also about something. It's about what do you do with if you had a million lifetimes? What would you do with it? How would you spend it?
Right.
How would you spend your day? How should you be a mensch in the world? And mensch is a Yiddish word that means mensch. That means a good man. It means a person.
Yes.
And so to me, it hits on all those cylinders.
Right.
And so I look for a film. For me, comedies have to tell something true about being human, has to tell something true about what humans, struggle with and deal with in their lives, has to be based on some incredible impossibility or implausibility. So that it doesn't have to be a fantasy like Groundhog Day. It can be something as simple as that movie with James Gandolfini and Julie Louis-Dreyfus, Enough Said.
Right.
Which is just this really, simple, quiet story about a masseuse, is kind of struggling. She meets a guy, maybe he's going to be her new boyfriend. At the same time, she meets a client who becomes a best friend. And the client is the ex-wife of the new boyfriend who hates James Gandolfini and keeps on saying terrible things about him, which starts to affect her relationship. Now, is that impossible? No. But it's improbable.
Yeah.
So you take an improbable or impossible situation, and then you let it develop. That's the only time that you can lie in a narrative. And then you let it develop honestly and organically. So a movie like Big, it has one lie in it. A kid makes a wish on a fortune-telling machine. He wakes up, he's the 30-year-old man. Could that ever happen? No. But if it did happen, what would happen then? And every step of that movie develops organically and honestly out of that premise. Now, some people might say, yeah, but how does he get a job at a computer, at a toy company? And the answer to that is because that's the theme. The theme of Big is what's the connection between adulthood and childhood? So, of course, you want him to meet some guy who works in that field, in that area. What would be the point of him meeting a guy who owns a gas station? So he ends up working at a gas station. You could do it, but it has nothing to do with the theme of the movie. So that, to me, are those three elements that make a great comedy. Character, premise, and theme.
Now, can you talk a little bit about what are the keys to making a good comedic lead character? Because there's normal leading man or leading woman, but a good comedic leading character. What are some of the keys for that?
I think the main key is the ability to not only not take yourself seriously, but make fun of yourself. A great example of that is John Hamm, who arguably, did a great dramatic job in Mad Men, but he's able to make fun of himself. He's able to let himself be seen in a ridiculous or negative light, and not pretend that he's pretending to be that guy. He owns it. So that it's the ability to take the pie in the face and not pretend it's somebody else.
But that's for more of an actor. But I'm talking about like on an actual character, on a writing standpoint. What makes a good leading character, comedic leading character, in a story?
Yourself or your mom or your dad. So in other words, when you're writing a character, rather than trying to make this character the stupidest guy you've ever seen, or the clumsiest guy you've ever seen, just tell the truth about yourself. All narrative, all fiction, is actually an autobiography. You're writing about the world that you see, your perceptions, your take, and so when you create a character, just make him as human as you are. People like to say, "Yeah, but my character is not that smart." And my answer to that is, so what makes you a genius? I mean, what I'd like to say is, people are not as smart as they'd like to think they are. On the other hand, they're not as stupid as they fear they are. They're just human.
Right.
My best examples are the classic sitcoms, All in the Family and Everybody Loves Raymond.
Yes.
The character of Archie Bunker. How did they come up with that character?
Oh my God.
Now it was based on a British sitcom, Till Death Us Do Part, in which a bigoted British guy was always in battle with his liberal son-in-law. But when Norman Lear wrote that, he didn't give two figs for this British guy. He wrote his father. He put his father in the character of Archie Bunker. Archie Bunker always used to say stifle when he wanted Edith to stop talking. Mm-hmm. That wasn't an invention. That's what his father said to her. His father would say to his mother, stifle. In one of the first episodes, Archie says to Meathead, he says, you are the laziest white man around. And Meathead says, that's racist. Well, then you're and then he makes something else. And it's exactly what his father said to Norman Lear. He just took it from life. And the same thing in terms of Everybody Loves Raymond. Ray Romano's Italian, but Phil Rosenthal, who wrote the pilot and was the executive producer, is Jewish. That mother, it's his mother. Mm-hmm. That father is his father. Mm-hmm. Yes, he used some of the autobiographical elements from Ray Romano's comedy, but he doesn't live in Ray Romano's skin. He doesn't walk in his shoes. He lives in his own skin. And so he offered his own family as the grist for that comedy mill. So how do you create a great character? Look in the mirror. And if your mirror isn't wide enough, then go home. Go home for Christmas or Thanksgiving and look in the mirror, but take a selfie with all those people behind. Look, when we get together at family gatherings with our cousins, what are we laughing at? We're laughing at our family. We're laughing at our uncles and aunts and how crazy they are. Just own it. Just share it. The hardest thing in the world is to give up the veneer of respectability and normalcy.
Yes.
I mean, we all want to appear smart and capable and this and that. And we know deep in our heart of hearts how truly messed up and how broken and how crazy we are. But we want to hide that at all times. In comedy, we don't hide anymore. We just let it out.
And you have to be authentic, is what you're saying, and be vulnerable as a writer.
Yeah, and as George Burns once said, the secret of success in show business is authenticity. Mm-hmm. And the minute you learn how to fake it, you've got it made.
Very true. Very true. I know I heard a quote I actually used in one of my podcasts the other day is like, the best friend you have in Hollywood is someone who stabs you in the face. And I was like, wow, that was such a great line. I had to use it. It was a great line. Now let me ask you, how does comedy structure differ from dramatic structure? Because we're beaten in with this dramatic structure, but there isn't a lot of talk about how comedic structure is different. Well,
when you're talking about structure, you're talking about a 3-act structure, or Michael Haig has his 6 turning points. It's not what's different about the comic hero's journey, as it were, from the hero's journey. And I use that term only because
you have a book called The Comics Hero's Journey.
Which my friend Chris Vogler wrote The Writer's Journey, and I called him up and I said, Chris, I'm ripping you off, but it's with love. I'm taking your title and I'm making fun of it, but out of love.
Yes.
So I think one of the differences is when creating a structure in a comedy, like I say, is that you get to make up shit once, and then you have to play it straight and play it honestly. So if this weird thing really happened, if I'm in this weird situation, what would happen then? So rather than thinking about plot, you're thinking about character. You're following the character through the narrative, as opposed to, and let's throw this at the character and that at the character. So in one sense, dramatic structure is a character, heroes have to be thrown obstacles. Otherwise, they'll just win, right? Mm-hmm. But think about us. Think about people. We can't even get out of the house on time, let alone have an obstacle thrown at us.
You're right. Like not being able to get the cup of coffee. It's no.
Right.
There's no. I didn't ask for soy. I asked for whole milk. And that the whole day's gone.
Right. So rather than thinking in terms of, okay, we've got to throw this obstacle at them, we have to have this villain. What you notice from watching a lot of comedies is that you don't need villains. You don't need antagonists in comedies. Sometimes there are, simply because of the structure of the story, but you don't need them. Who's the antagonist in Groundhog Day? It's himself.
Yeah.
He has to evolve from himself. Who's the antagonist in 40-Year-Old Virgin? There is none. No one's trying to stop him from getting laid.
Right. He has to break through his own thing.
In fact, everybody is hell-bent trying to help him.
Right.
So there's a number of differences. In a dramatic structure, you have a hero who has all the skills they need to do whatever they need to do. Bruce Willis in Die Hard. No, he walks on glass with no shoes, and he kills like 8 dozen bad guys, and he has wisecracks all the way throughout. Mm-hmm. He's got all the skills in the world, and so you have to keep on figuring out how can I make it harder on him and harder on him. Whereas in a comic structure, your hero starts off with a minus, a negative. They're broken. They have a hole inside them that they don't know. They're not aware of. So in the beginning of a comic story, your character thinks that they're fine. We in the audience can tell, well, that guy, Phil Connors in Groundhog Day, he's a jerk. That guy, Andy in 40-Year-Old Virgin, he's a dweeb. He needs to, meet a girl. Mm-hmm. But they think everything's going okay. They don't want to rock the boat. And when something happens to rock their boat, the first thing they try to do is they go into denial. It's not happening, or they desperately want to go back to the normal world that they think is working for them that we see is not. Mm-hmm. And then what happens over the course of the structure, as these broken people who start their stories off with damaged or absent relationships, they gather families around themselves. Mm-hmm. And so everybody, every character, every hero character in a comedy is forming a kind of dysfunctional family around themselves to help them through their transformation. And when they get to the end, there's usually a segment in which there is, and this is similar in dramas, there's an all is lost moment.
Right.
But why that's so important for comedy is that people sometimes forget that the most important moment in a comedy is the pain, is the loss, is how characters deal with that pain and that loss, as opposed to, well, let's just make it funny. Well, here's another funny thing. Well, here's another funny thing. Wouldn't it be funny if we do this, or wouldn't it be funny if we do that? So part of the difference of the structure is that in the hero's journey, the hero goes off into the unknown world and brings back an elixir that will heal the world. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. In the comic hero's journey, the comic hero is thrown inadvertently or against their better judgment or against their will into a world they don't want to be in, and as a result have to transform and thereby heal themselves to be better able to be a person, a mensch mm-hmm. in the world. So they're not really changing the world as much as they're changing themselves. So all comedy is transformational.
That makes amazing sense.
A character in a comedy doesn't realize that they have to change, but they have to change because the world as they knew it is taken away from them. They're in Oz, or they're a 30-year-old man when they're really 12 years old, or they're living the same day over and over again, or they just find themselves in a weird situation. And what do they have to do? They have to become different, even though they don't want to become different. And over the course, so another difference in structure is that in a dramatic structure, your hero has a goal in the beginning of the movie. I'm going to catch the killer, or I'm going to solve this mystery, or I'm going. What does Luke say in the beginning of Star Wars? He says, "I want to be a pilot. I want to join the rebellion." So what happens by the end of Star Wars?
He saves the rebellion.
He's a pilot and he joins the rebellion.
Right.
But in a comedy, your hero has a short-sighted goal. Their initial goal is wrong-headed or short-sighted. What does the kid in Big want? He just wants to be big enough to ride on a ride at a carnival to be with the girl of his dreams.
Right.
What does Phil Connors want? He just wants to get a job. Well, in the beginning, he just wants to get a better job at a bigger news station where he can be a weatherman in a bigger station, a bigger network.
Yeah.
In 40-Year-Old Virgin, what does Andy want? All he wants is to be left alone because his days are filled. He's playing Halo. He's practicing the tuba. He's painting his little figurines. He's happy. Yeah. He thinks he's happy.
Right.
So what happens in a comedy is that your characters have a discovered goal, a goal that wasn't apparent to them or us in the audience at the beginning of the movie that later becomes something they discover as they're transforming. And so midway or half, 3/4 of the way through or 40% of the way through, they discover that they want something else. They want something new. And then they put all their attention and focus to try to get that discovered goal.
That's a great answer, sir, to a question. Yes, the comics hero's journey. It's all there. It's all there.
It's all in here.
It's all in here.
Available on Amazon and Kindle.
Do you have the audiobook yet?
No. I'm even though I have a face that's great for radio. I'm not. Audiobooks are. People have asked me about audiobooks, but what they don't realize is that you have to pay unless you're James Comey and somebody's asked you to make one. You have to pay to make an audiobook, and then your publisher has to flog it. It's actually a thing. Not as easy as people like to think it is. Also, having to stay in a studio and read this entire freaking thing.
Oh man, I'm going through. I know.
Are you doing the audio version of your book?
I am doing the audio version of my book, but I'm a podcaster and I've been podcasting for a long time, and I have the gear.
There you go.
So I'm doing it, but it's not like this voice. When I'm reading the book, it's not like, "Hey guys, how you doing?" It's not that. And today, so I have my audiobook voice, which
you're like the NPR girls on the SNL sketch.
Right. Today,
so we have
sweaty balls today. So it's similar to that, but not completely. Right. But sweaty balls, what a great bit. Now I wanted to touch upon a genre of comedy, which and I just want to hear your thoughts on it. Fish Out of Water, which is such a great comedic world to be thrown into, like the Crocodile Dundees, the Beverly Hills Cops, those kind of things. Any tips on what writers can do to do? Because I haven't seen a good Fish Out of Water comedy in a long time. Honestly, what was the last good one you saw?
Well, I mean, there's been a dearth of great film comedy. Almost everything that's really good, or a lot of everything that's really good, is happening on TV or streaming. Yeah.
That's very true. Yeah. The Grace and Frankie's of the world. And
I guess, Spy with Melissa McCarthy, she was a fish out of water.
That would be that was funny as hell too. I love that movie.
For me, we are all fish out of water. We're swimming around. Everything seems great, and then we're forced, as Amy Sherman Palladino wrote, we're forced out through a hole that's smaller than a lady's purse, and we're thrust into a world we didn't make, we didn't ask for, and we don't know how the hell we got there. We can't do anything. We are fish out of water. Our whole lives are fish out of water. We like to pretend that we're in water. You know, we're swimming in our waters, but for the most part, everybody is a tale of a fish out of water. In fact, that's why comedians who are outsiders in their culture are so successful. That's why Canadians are so successful
in America, right?
Yeah, because they're
perspective.
They can't fight the encroaching American culture, but they're kind of outsiders to it. African Americans, Jews, all the ethnic comedians who came up in the 20s and 30s and 40s. They're in a way outsiders, and so in that way, everybody's story is a fish out of water.
Very, very true. Now there's
and when you take a situation in which you tear somebody away from what his normal world is, you create a fish out of water. Bill Murray's a fish out of water. He's living the same day over and over again. The character of Big is a fish out of water. So a fish out of water just doesn't mean a nerd gets caught in a space capsule and has to be the world's first astronaut.
Right.
I mean, they've actually made that movie, but that's not the only way to tell that story. Got
it. So what you're saying, because I'm calling it more of like, when I say fish out of water, it's more like the Beverly Hills Cop, literally the Troy cop in Beverly Hills, completely out of his place. But you're saying that there's elements of that in almost every story. In one way, shape, or form, almost, especially in comedics. Yeah.
Well, in a comedy, once the characters have experienced what I call the WTF moment, they are in fact fish out of water who, at first, desperately try to swim back to more familiar waters. Tropic Thunder. You have a bunch of actors pretending to be in Vietnam. The director is literally getting punched out by the studio head, and he gets this idea given to him by Nick Nolte to bring everybody out into country to have them experience what it would be like if they were really in country in Vietnam. And 2 minutes in, he gets blown up, and they're stranded, and they have to make their way back to the extraction point to get back to their hotels.
Right.
They're automatically fish out of water.
Right.
They're forced to be soldiers when they don't want to be soldiers. They're actors. And only one of them, Jay Baruchel, only one of them's actually read the manual, so he knows how to read a map. So it would be hard for me to think of a movie in which your character isn't a fish out of water at some point.
That's a very good analogy. Very, very good. Now, romantic comedies, which is a whole other subgenre of what we're talking about. That's a whole other beast.
Yeah.
In your opinion, what makes good romantic comedies work? Because when it's good, it's really good. When Harry Met Sally, Sleepless in Seattle, Annie Hall,
right.
Those, when they work, they are just hitting on all pistons. But there's been a lot of bad ones too.
Well, I'm remembering. I can't remember the name, but they all have Katherine Heigl, and the guy from 300. What's the
Gerard Butler.
Gerald Butler. They all feature Katherine Heigl and Gerald Butler. And I remember watching this movie, and about 15 minutes in, she's up a tree spying on him, and I'm thinking, oh, that'll happen. Here's the problem with bad romantic comedy movies. They think that romantic comedy is about getting two people who are destined to be together. Mm-hmm. And then because they're destined to be together, you have to come up with ways of keeping them apart. Let's just come up with ways of keeping them apart. But that's not really the problem that people have in relationships. People don't have the problem of keeping you apart. The problem is, how do you stay together and not kill each other?
Yes, absolutely.
So the really good romantic comedies are, I guess I would put Sleepless in Seattle as an exception, mm-hmm. because that's really a romantic comedy in which two fated people who are apart figure out a way to get together. Right. But they start off on opposite ends of the country. You don't have to create an artificial obstacle to keep them apart. But movies like When Harry Met Sally,
Pretty Woman.
Pretty Woman. I to me that's not really a great example of the genre. I'm thinking more like 500 Days of Summer.
Yes.
Annie
Hall, of course.
Annie Hall. Even About a Boy, which is not a romantic comedy insofar as Hugh Grant is going to be romantically involved with that boy, but it is a romantic comedy because it's about him connecting with somebody else besides himself.
Or Notting Hill. That was another really
or Notting Hill.
That's a great one.
And it's all about not how do you overcome these artificial obstacles. It's how do you figure out how to stay together with the obstacles that are there to begin with. You're two different human beings. You have different DNA. Mm-hmm. Your molecules rotate and vibrate at different frequencies. Mm-hmm. The real problem in relationships is once we figure out how to swipe right and swipe left, is then when we meet, how do you stay together? I mean, because 50% of all marriages end in divorce. Mm-hmm. So staying together is not easy. You don't have to create an obstacle. You have to figure out, how do we stay together? How do we figure out how to be one in a pair as opposed to the one that we know? So that's what I think a good romantic comedy is. A good romantic comedy explores how we are in relationships and what we do in relationships and why we're so bad at relationships, as opposed to, well, these two people are just going to love each other unless we put some kind of wall between them. They're just going to break through that wall and rut like animals. No, mm-hmm. No, they're, people have a hard time being in the same room with each other. How do you get past that?
I mean, When Harry Met Sally is a really great example of that.
Yeah.
And that whole exploration was, Nora Ephron was probably one of the geniuses in the genre, without question. And even Notting Hill, they have obstacles, but the obstacles are just what baggage they bring, each of them bring to the relationship. Julia Roberts is a movie star. He's a book store owner. How are we going to make this work? We love each other, but how are we going to stay together? And it's about, how do we stay together?
Exactly. As opposed to, how do we get them together? How do we keep them apart for 90 minutes?
Right.
One of the examples that I use in my workshops, when people ask me this question, I showed them a couple of scenes from Dan in Real Life, which was
Steve Carell. Yeah.
Steve Carell. And Dan in Real Life, Steve Carell's a widower. He's been depressed for 2 years. He meets this wonderful woman, Juliette Binoche, in a bookstore, and they chat and they talk. And he goes back because they're having like a family reunion at this, unbelievable, perfect house with the perfect family and the perfect everything. And he goes back. And everybody can tell that he's kind of hepped up about something, and they say, what happened? And he says, I might have met a girl. And then his brother, who's Dane Cook, and by the way, when you're in a movie and Dane Cook is out acting you're in trouble. I just want to say that. Dane Cook introduces his fiancée, and it turns out to be Julia Binoche from the bookstore. And at that moment, the movie goes wrong. At that moment, Steve Carell lies and says, "Oh, hi, what's your name?" Okay, here's the result of that. Later on in the movie, about 40 minutes later, because they're trying to pretend that they don't know each other, he ends up fully clothed in a shower, pretending to take a shower. If your character ends up in a shower fully clothed, you've made a wrong turn. People don't do that. It doesn't happen in real life. Here's what would have been a better turn for them. She comes in the door, and he says, "Well, we actually know each other." Well, she's the girl I met in the bookstore. And she might be embarrassed for a second. Mm-hmm. And then he would say, no, but now I can see Dane Cook while you love her because she's great. Congratulations, my brother.
Right.
And so the movie becomes, how long can you fool yourself into thinking that you're happy for your brother as opposed to really wanting her for yourself? And that becomes, to my mind, much more interesting movie than winding up in a shower fully clothed, getting wet. Because wouldn't it be funny if I had to hide? Why is he hiding? Why? So he's talking to his brother's fiancée. Why is he hiding in a shower? And somebody turns the shower on.
And it's interesting because they a lot of times when I feel like when writers and directors and even actors and performers, when they don't have that hold on story structure. Or story, or like what you're talking about.
Or character.
Exactly.
What would be believable for the character?
Right. They then automatically lean on slapstick. They lean on, like, how can we get a gag out of here? Like, wouldn't it be funny?
Wouldn't it be funny if? There's a great story about the making of Groundhog Day. Mm-hmm. And in one of the earlier drafts in Groundhog Day, when he wakes up and it's the third day and it's the third time in a row, and is it really happening? Am I going crazy? And in the script, they have him shaving his head into a mohawk, destroying the room, setting fire to half the room, painting the other room in Day-Clo colors. He goes to sleep, 6 o'clock, Sonny and Cher are on the radio. He wakes up the same day. And they looked at those rushes. And Harold Ramis and I'm guessing Bill Murray or the producers looked at each other and said, "Why would he cut his hair into a mohawk? Why would he do that?"
I mean, visually it's funny, but it doesn't work.
How does it help?
It doesn't help.
Why would this character do that? And so, at great expense, they reshot the scene. And all that happens in the scene, if you remember, is he breaks a pencil. And he puts one down on the floor and he puts one on the nightstand, and he wakes up the next morning and the pencil is whole and he knows it's happening.
Right. And it's so brilliantly simple.
Simple, honest, and direct, as opposed to wouldn't it be funny if? And from that point on, and Steve Tobolowsky, who has his own podcast, relates that that from that moment on, the question always was, what would they really do? What would really happen? In fact, at the end of Groundhog Day, there was this whole debate because Andy McDowell wins him in the Bachelor auction and takes him home. And there was this whole debate on how the last scene should go. Did they have sex? What happened? Would he wake up like naked? Would he wake up? And they rather than thinking, well, wouldn't it be funny if we do this? They put it to a vote. The entire cast and crew got to vote on what would happen that night. What would happen with these two characters? Because they were no longer fictional characters. They were real. They were human beings. Mm-hmm. And what would these two human beings do? And that's why, spoiler, at the next day, it turns out that all he did was fall asleep. And Andy McDowell says, "You just fell asleep." And he says, It was the end of a really long day.
It's just so brilliant.
It's brilliant.
It's so brilliant. And the song is different when it pops on.
Exactly.
It was great. Oh, I gotta watch that movie again. It's so great. I do want to also touch upon dark comedies.
Yes.
Specifically, one of my favorite dark comedies, Heathers, which was arguably a comedy. But it is funny as hell. And you can't make that movie today. Like, that movie would never in a million years be made today.
Why can't you make it
I think
today?
there's a lot of PC stuff that wouldn't get through. Like, I mean, like when I saw Blazing,
just killing high schoolers.
The school killings with the gun in the school. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that just wouldn't fly today. Like when I saw Blazing Saddles for the first time, I was like, well, there's no way in hell that movie could be made today. Like, it's just not going to happen. And I saw this years ago, but even then, and then Borat showed up. I was like, well, okay, apparently everything's out the door. But with Heather specifically, that film, which is it's a genius piece of work, in my opinion. What are tips that you could give writers on how to write good dark comedies? Because again, I haven't seen a lot of good dark comedies lately either. I mean, when was the last good dark comedy you saw? It's a rarity in the genre now.
I'm guessing. I'm thinking about things like Wag the Dog.
That's still 25 years ago. Yeah,
Dr. Strangelove,
of course.
I think the key. I mean, listen, Breaking Bad is a dark comedy.
In so many ways, it is. It was so brilliant.
Mad Men is a dark comedy.
And TV, there is more of these examples.
The Sopranos is a dark comedy. I think the besides the fact that it's one thing to make a television episode for $2.3 million, and it's another thing to make a movie for $40 to $200 million. But I think the thing you have to do is you have to know who you're making fun of and what you're making fun of. And you have to punch up, don't punch down.
That's why Heathers was so smart. It punched so up above the genre of high school comedy.
Well, it's also you're not making. Listen, we're all living in a dark comedy, aren't we?
Oh God,
we're all whistling. No, but not just today's political situation. Sure. We're all whistling past the graveyard. That's what all black comedy is. I guess this is also 20 years ago. A Fish Called Wanda is kind of a dark comedy.
Kind of a dark, yeah.
And what it all comes down to is, as we're whistling past the graveyard, we're trying to make fun of the things that terrify us. So to me, the way to make a dark comedy is to focus on how the people are coping with it. How are they coping with it? Because in a metaphorical sense, we're all struggling in a dark comedy, and the end of all our dark comedies is not too funny. None of us, as they say, none of us get out of this alive. So, or as Clint Eastwood says in The Unforgiven, we all get what's coming to us.
Yeah.
So the idea is that you're not pretending when you say that there's death and dismemberment out there waiting for you. How do people deal with that? How do they react to that? What happens to the living people as they grapple with these issues of death and destruction and extinction? So that if you're making a dark comedy, honestly, you're just finding what's ridiculous and absurd in what we're doing to deal with the fact that we're living, we're on this blue cinder spinning through a void. We don't know where we came from. We don't know where we're going to. And yet we're going to wake up tomorrow and have frozen yogurt, because frozen yogurt at least will make it a little bit better.
We are the only creature on the planet that knows that we will not be here eventually.
Right. And what do we do based on that? Do we all sit home weeping softly, writing haiku? No. We wake up and we say, Thai food.
That'll do it today. I think Thai.
That'll do it. Yeah, Thai or like dark chocolate.
Dark chocolate, of course. 80%.
Starbucks.
Every day, Starbucks.
I'm going to spend $3.25 because Starbucks will make my eventual descent into death and entropy. It'll make it a little bit more worthwhile.
That's great. That's so amazing. Now, another question I have for you is, and I'm curious to hear your answer on this, the difference between comedy and funny, because there is a difference. There is a major difference.
Absolutely. I start a lot of my workshops off with a comedy perception test. Mm-hmm. I give them 7 different versions of a man slipping on a banana peel. Man slipping on a banana peel, man in top hat slipping, man slipping on a banana peel after kicking a dog, man slipping on a banana peel after losing his job, blind man slipping on a banana peel, blind man's dog slipping on a banana peel, man slipping on a banana peel and dying. And then I ask them, okay, select which one you think is the funniest, the least funniest, the most comic, and the least comic. And somebody will go, well, what's the difference? And I'll go, excellent question.
I'm glad you asked.
Select which one you think is the funniest, the least funniest, the most comic, and the least comic. I don't answer the question. I just say, select which one you think. They could be different. They could be the same. And so then we'll start with, okay, how many of you here, whether it's 20 people or 300 people, how many of you here thought A, man slipping on a banana peel was the funniest? How many people thought D, man slipping on a banana peel after losing his job was the funniest? And so we'll go through all of that. And then at the end, I'll go and I'll say, so here's the answer to which one of these is the funniest. You're all right. You're all correct. It's like, don't you feel affirmed? It's like the 60s. Kumbaya.
We all get a participation trophy.
Because funny is subjective.
Completely.
What you think is funny is different from what you think is funny, and you're both right. But comedy is not subjective. Comedy is the art of telling what's true, and specifically telling what's true about human beings. So that even if I'm creating a moment with a character that you are not laughing at, if I'm telling the truth about a human being without whitewashing them or without just ignoring some of their defects, it's comedy, even though you might not laugh. At the end of Dr. Strangelove, when Slim Pickens is riding the bomb down to what we know is our entire extinction. Mm-hmm. Talk about black comedy. Brilliant. Some people in the audience laugh. There's a nervous titter. Mm-hmm. Many people don't. But it's not a dramatic moment. As he's going, yippee-yi-ki-yi.
You're right.
It's a comedic moment, even if you're not laughing. So there's a difference between comedy and funny. Funny is what makes you laugh. And it's different for everybody. But comedy is telling the truth, telling the truthful story of a less than perfect person struggling against insurmountable odds without many of the required skills and tools with which to win, yet never giving up hope. And because of that, what I try to tell writers and directors and performers and executives is don't chase funny. Because you're chasing a fraction of the audience. Right. If it works, people will laugh. If it doesn't work, people won't laugh. Then change it after your previews. But tell the truth. Tell the truth in a truthful way, in an unexpected and yet ultimately
authentic.
Human way,
yeah,
authentic way.
Yeah.
Thanks. And comedy will occur. Also, make yourself laugh. I mean, you're a human being.
Right.
So,
if you're not laughing,
right,
chances are they're not going to laugh.
Don't try to outthink the audience. Don't try to think, what will they find funny? Wouldn't it be funny if I did this? Use your own sense of humor, only guided, only kind of limited by telling the story honestly and truthfully through character and theme.
I'm going to ask you a deeper question here. When you say, and I think this is a question that will go through all writing, all storytelling, all art in general, is the ability to be honest, be authentic, be truthful. And what stops an artist from doing so? Because as an artist myself and the work that I do, one of the reasons why this podcast is done as well as it has over the years is because I am completely authentic and I ask authentic questions and I want truth.
Right.
And that's why people gravitated towards it. What stops the artist from doing so? Is it just pure fear of people making fun of them or of, things like that? But I've always found that when I'm honest about my work, whether it be my writing, whether it be like my new book, which is as honest as I could possibly be, a film that I direct, when I'm honest about it, that's when the magic is. But it's scarier.
Well, I'm not sure that there's one answer to that, but I think part of that answer is not trusting that your story is good enough, that your point of view is good enough, worrying that other people won't enjoy it, worrying that somebody who really knows finances but doesn't know art is telling you, I don't think it's funny. Okay, then I'll look for somebody who does, and you won't produce it, or you won't be my agent. But I think it comes out of fear is part of it, but it comes out of the sense that there's the sense that I'm not enough. For me, a perfect example is I'm going to pronounce her name wrong. It's the director who directed Enough Said, Friends with Money, Please Give, Nicole Holofcener.
Okay, I don't know.
I think I'm mispronouncing her name. Mm-hmm. She makes these beautifully crafted, beautiful movies, comic movies, and there's very little slapstick. There's no big gags. There's not a lot of sex scenes. 13-year-olds are not drawn to her movies, and yet her movies are wonderful. Mm-hmm. But it has a kind of a limited viewership so far. Mm-hmm. And I think people are worried that if they don't put in the big dick joke, mm-hmm. that they won't make money, or they won't sell, or the studio will be disappointed. So there's fear, and sometimes it's a justified fear, because I mean, how many 5-star restaurants are there out there, and how many McDonald's are there out there? So if you're studying to be a chef, should you go to a McDonald's and see what's made them so successful?
Different model, different to everything.
Yeah, I mean, you have to strive towards your own sense of excellence, and know that doesn't translate into an economic model necessarily. Wow,
honestly, you've kind of blown my mind a little bit, because there was that light bulb that just went off in my head when you said, if you're trying to be a chef, if you're training to be a chef, why would you go to McDonald's to see how? Because they're very successful.
Yeah, but
it's a different kind of success, as opposed to why wouldn't you go to a Gordon Ramsay restaurant and see how he's doing it, and why, or a fine dining restaurant that has the 5 stars.
Let's not say Gordon Ramsay, because I don't think that food that's yelled at is as good.
Fair enough. It's one of the few chefs I know. Wolfgang.
I hate you, you omelet.
Yes, exactly. But I think one of the issues with Hollywood in general is too, so many people go to watch studio movies that are financial vehicles. They're made for money. They're not made particularly for story. Every once in a while, someone sneaks in a story. Every once in a while, you get one of these, that has money behind it, has big stars, and has a story. But they're becoming rare and rare, much rare.
But you know what the studio system does so well is taking stories that already work and visualizing them.
Correct.
That's why the Marvel movies do so well.
Yeah.
Because those stories were great when they were 10-cent comics. And these great craftsmen and technicians and great actors visualize them for us, but the story's already there. The characters are already there. And to give them credit, they don't screw the characters up. The Marvel characters were screwed up human beings to start off with when they were 10 and 12-cent comics, and they're still screwed up human beings. All the movies did was honor that, as opposed to the DC movies in which they can't figure out the stories came out of we do right. We're the Justice League. We do right because that's the right thing to do. Guys,
it's not enough.
Really? And so they kind of veer between let's go as dark as possible and let's have lots of wisecracks. They still have. I haven't seen Aquaman. I understand Aquaman is a little bit better than.
Wonder Woman was wonderful. I thought Wonder Woman was wonderful.
Wonder Woman was good
from the DC world. That is
from the DC world. I mean, it was female empowerment, and it was in a period that wasn't the modern day. So I think they kind of solved it in a good way. But I think what movies do so well is take existing stories and help us see them for who they are, like Lord of the Rings. Whereas if you want to see a really good movie, take a look at an independent, see what's coming out of Sundance, see what somebody has made that wasn't made through the studio system, but made because this is the story I want to tell, like Eighth Grade.
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet, but I hear it's amazing.
Oh, it's so good, and it obviously, or maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm totally wrong about this, but to me, it obviously wasn't made after a story conference at Sony.
No, I'm almost positive it wasn't. Now, since one of your books is called The Hidden Tools of Comedy, can you give us a few hidden tools?
Well, I've already given you a couple.
Okay.
We start off with the paradigm, what I call the comedy equation. Comedy is about an ordinary guy or gal. Jackie Gleason used to call him a moke, struggling against insurmountable odds without many of the required skills and tools with which to win, yet never giving up hope. Now, from that paradigm, we draw usable practical tools. The tool of winning. Comedy gives your characters the permission to win. Not that they're trying to be funny, but they're trying to win. I do an exercise in my workshop. I ask 3 people who I make sure are not performers, and I tell them that they're lawyers, and the most important court case in their careers began in a courthouse 4 blocks away 5 minutes ago. I say to them, what should you do to solve the problem? And they or people in the audience say they should run there. And I'll ask them, what would actors do? And they say actors would talk about it. They'd create dialogue. So then I tell them, okay, for muscle memory, just run out the door. You're 3 lawyers. You're 5 minutes late, it's 4 blocks away, run out the door. So they run out the door. Then I bring them each in individually and I say, okay, here's the crazy thing. For some crazy reason, you have to be the second person out the door. Don't tell the others. I'll bring each of the 3 in. I'll tell them, you have to be second. I'll bring them all in. Now, these are not performers.
Sure.
I bring them all in and I say, most important case of the 3 lawyers, most important case happened started 5 minutes ago in a courthouse 4 blocks away, go. And what will happen is they'll rush to the door and then begin this odd little dance of trying to get through the door. And occasionally somebody will figure it out, but most often I'll have to side coach and say, I give you the permission to do what you need to do in order to win. And what I usually do is I usually pick 2 big guys and a tiny girl.
All right.
And at some point, one of the big guys gets the idea, oh, I don't have to be a gentleman, picks up the girl, throws her outside, leaves. So he can be second. it's an experiment. It doesn't work the same way all the time. It doesn't work all the time, but invariably the audience laughs. And I'll bring the people back out and I'll say, who directed that? And they'll say, no one. And I'll say to the audience, I'm sorry, directors, I'm sorry. We don't need directors. And I'll say, who wrote that scene? And they'll say, no one. Or they'll say, you did, Mr. Kaplan, because no, I said, I didn't write it. I just set up this situation. Mm-hmm. What happened at the door, that was you. And so I'll say, you don't need directors. You don't even need writers. You just need characters who are given the permission to do what they need to do in order to win. Because when they were doing that weird dance at the door, they weren't trying to be funny. They were simply trying to solve a problem. An unsolvable problem, as it turns out, but simply trying to solve a problem. So rather than trying to be funny, characters are given the permission to do what they need to do in order to win, which is why when Woody Allen is arguing with some guy on a line at a movie, he's able to drag Marshall McLuhan out from behind a poster in Annie Hall to win his argument.
It's brilliant. That was such a brilliant move. I love that.
Because, although now that I find out that Woody Allen is really a creepy pervert,
yes.
That's unfortunately not all the best people are great artists, and he happens to be one of the not great people. But
right,
so winning, the idea that comedy gives you the permission to win, is one of the tools. Non-hero, not a comic hero, not a fool, not a ridiculous person, but simply somebody who lacks some, if not all, the essential skills and tools with which to win. Straight line, wavy line. Most people think of comedians, comics as funny people, and then they're the straight man who kind of just set the funny people up to do something funny.
Right.
And what the tool of straight line, wavy line does is it recognizes the fact that that's a false dynamic. John Cleese once said that when they started Monty Python, they thought that comedy was watching somebody do something silly. They later came to realize that comedy is watching somebody watch somebody do something silly. Watching somebody watch somebody do something silly. So that in a comic dynamic, you have somebody who's blind to a problem or creating the problem, like Kramer, and somebody who's struggling with the problem, but because they're a non-hero, they can't solve the problem, like Jerry. So if you look at comedy, if you look at sitcoms, you're always seeing a straight line, somebody who's kind of blind to who they are or what they're doing, like Joey in Friends, and somebody who kind of notices it but doesn't quite know exactly how to deal with it or what to say to it, like Chandler. And so you have this dynamic. And the dynamic can switch because it's not about character, it's about focus. Who is the story about at that moment? Who's in focus? And so those are some of the tools in the hidden tools of comedy, along with archetypes, comic premise, metaphorical relationships, a lot of stuff.
So
280 pages of genius.
It's obviously, sir. Now you have mentioned it a few times, but let's talk about your two books that you have out. Okay. The Hidden Tools of Comedy.
You mean this book?
Yes.
And this book?
Yes, those two books, yes.
It's funny you should mention that.
Tell us about your older book is for the book that first came out was The Hidden Tools of Comedy, which is done very, very well. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, like I said, it basically talks about the things that are not taught at AFI or USC or NYU, because people still think comedy is, well, let's do something funny, let's do some gags. And it talks about the things that actually increase or decrease the comedic elements in a scene, and what you can do. Because it's not about, well, you're just born funny. It's about if you give a character skills, if you have them be a hero, you're creating a dramatic moment. And a skill could be something as simple as awareness. Kind of, so when a character is aware of his situation, that could depress him. That's a dramatic moment. But if a character isn't aware, is kind of blithely just going along, not realizing how screwed up they are and how hopeless their situation is, that's a comedic moment. So you can actually increase or decrease the comedic elements in a scene or the dramatic elements in a scene simply by giving or taking away skills for your character.
Got it. And then now your new book, The Comedic Hero's Journey, we've kind of touched upon a lot of the elements of that.
And that basically, it kind of is a riff on the hero's journey, and talks about, so what happens in the comic hero's journey? What differences are there? What tweaks do you have to make? And how is that journey different, either in a great way or in a subtle way, different from the dramatic hero's journey? And it's as I say, it's serious story structure for fabulously funny films.
Now, I also heard you had a few workshops coming up.
Yeah. One of the things I do is I go around and do these, for the most part, they're 2-day workshops. And you can find out all about them on my website, kaplancomedy.com. That's Kaplan with a K, comedy with a C. Because if I spelled comedy with a K, that would make me a hack. So
right, obviously.
It's got to be kaplancomedy, all one word.com. So we're doing one in Belgium, in Brussels,
that must be amazing,
on February 16th and 17th. I don't speak Belgium, but they speak comedy, so I think we'll be okay. And then I'm in Los Angeles in March 2nd and 3rd. And I'm in London on April 27th and 28th. And I think I might be going to New York or San Francisco later in the year, but those still have to be worked out.
That's amazing. And because you mentioned Belgium or Brussels, how does comedy? Because comedy doesn't travel well. What's funny in one country is not funny in another.
It does,
but funny doesn't, but comedy does.
Right. What's the language may be different. I've taught these workshops in Singapore, in Melbourne, in Paris, in Kiev. The language may be different. Culture, customs, government may be different, but people are the same. We're all born. We all go to school. We all have secrets from our parents. Our parents have secrets from us. We all want to fall in love or get as much love, however we define it, any way we can. We have relationships, or married. We have kids. We have parents. We have uncles. I mean, human beings are the same all over the world, even though we might use different words for different objects, even though some customs might be different, but people stay the same. And what I've noticed going around the world is that I can show a clip from an American movie or a American television show, and people laugh because they understand what's happening to those people in that situation. And so there's people all over the world can laugh at Groundhog Day, even if they don't speak English as the first language.
Fair enough. Now I'm going to ask you a few questions. Last questions I ask all my guests.
Okay.
What advice?
I'm a Libra. My favorite color is blue. I like long walks on the beach.
I was born a small child.
I was born at a very early age.
That's great. That's a great line. That's a great line.
That's from my palm reading bit. I see you were born at a very early age.
I'm good. I have to tell you, I will steal that for parties.
Okay, please.
Now, what advice would you give a screenwriter or a comedic writer wanting to break into the business today?
Okay, I would recommend 3 things.
Buy your books. First, buy your books, obviously.
That's actually not my recommendation, but thank you for putting that out there. I would recommend 3 things. 1, take an improv class. Even if you don't want to perform, even if you're not looking to be on SNL or part of UCB, comedy is an actor-centric art form. It's about the character. So some of the best training you can get is to be in a class where you pretend or you practice being a character, seeing through a character's eyes, hearing through a character's ears. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is that as you're writing, and we're talking about screenwriters, right?
Yes.
Hear your stuff read out loud. You cannot figure out what's happening just based upon you and your screen or you and your legal pad. You have to get people in a room, half of them reading parts, half of them just listening, tape it because you're going to go into a coma at certain parts where it's not working, and listen to what is happening when human beings say your words in context. I also suggest that you have wine and cheese.
Much wine.
And plenty wine. But you have to hear it read out loud, because comedy doesn't exist in your head or in a vacuum. And the third thing is that no one ever got a job because they have a great resume with a great font. It's all about who you know and who you have gone to college with or went to summer camp with. So one of the things I tell people to do is all the stories that they've heard about some guy who went to a dentist, and the dentist also did the teeth of Jim Carrey, and they got a. Those things are obnoxious, but something like that does happen.
Oh yeah.
So that what you need to do is you need to make a list of everybody who you've ever known or might have known or stood in back of a line at Starbucks, and you want to make sure that you maintain those connections, and you want to know that you have no idea where your next job is coming from. So your job is to be out there in the universe. Say yes to the universe. I don't want to go to this screening. Go. You don't know who you're going to meet. I don't want to take this class. Take it. You don't know who you're going to meet. Because your next job is going to come from somebody who knows you. And that's not networking, just networking for networking's sake. Like, when you're at a party and somebody's looking over your shoulder to see who else came in the door. Because you don't have any idea who's going to help you. And the best way to figure out who's going to help you is for you to help other people. Be on a film crew.
Yep.
Help out. Be part of a reading. Hold a microphone, hold a boom, and see where it leads you. Because there are a million ways to break into the business, but you can't break into the business sitting at home wondering, how am I going to break into the business?
I was talking to Daniel Knopf, the creator of Carnival, and he said, he's like, ours is the only business that has larceny in it. How do you break into the business? And he's like, it's true. Like, you never like, how do I break into the cookie business? Like, no one says that. People always want to break in, or, how do I break through the door? It's always larceny involved in not breaking into this business.
Well, I'll say there's one other thing. Yeah. It's really simple. But there are only two rules. Number one, be brilliant.
Yes.
Rule number two, let people know about it. That's it.
Man.
That's it. If you've got a story and you've written a script and nobody wants it, turn it into a novel. Make it a podcast, write a blog, get it out there. Let people know about it, because you don't know what's going to happen. I had a client, a guy I worked with on a trip to Australia through Screen Australia and Film Victoria. And he wrote this wonderful script about a guy on the Asperger's spectrum who came up with a way of getting a relationship for himself. And he wrote the script. And I thought the script was funny. Nobody wanted it. Especially Australia is the kind of place where you get government funding. And the government doesn't want to fund silly comedies. They want to fund serious works about itinerant, inarticulate sheep herders who are on a lighthouse in Tasmania who haven't talked to anybody in 10 years. Yes. That they'll fund.
Yes.
So what he did was he said, F this. I think it's a great story. I'm not getting anywhere. I'm not a spring chicken. I've made the bad decision to be over 50. So I'm going to write this as a novel. So he wrote it as a novel. It got published, and it got optioned by the same people who turned down his screenplay. And as part of his option, he gets to write the first screenplay. So there's more than one way to skin a cat.
Sure.
When I was doing a project for HBO, they had this performance space in Hollywood. I think now it's gotten taken over by Comedy Central. Mm-hmm. And we had this one actress who did a show. And she was pretty funny, but for some reason, she wasn't getting any jobs. So she wrote a one-person show for herself, and she did it at the HBO Workspace, which no longer is there. So don't ask me to give you an in to the HBO because they're no longer there. And we did it, and people from HBO came to see it, and people laughed. They loved it. Nothing happened. She didn't just say, "Well, I guess I'll just have to work at Starbucks now for the rest of my life." She rented a theater on Melrose and ran it one night a week for like a year. And she went to the kind of groups that she thought would come to see it. She sold tickets. One night, a woman named Rita Wilson came. Rita Wilson is Tom Hanks' wife. And because Rita Wilson was intrigued by her title, My Big Fat Greek Wedding.
Yeah.
And she saw it, and she saw Nia Vardalos do this one-person show. And she brought Tom Hanks the next week, and Plato and made it. And it was the highest-grossing independent romantic comedy ever made.
Yep.
Because she had something brilliant. She wouldn't take no for an answer. She didn't just send the script to the same person over and over again. She said, if they don't want this, I'm just going to keep showing it till somebody comes along who does want it. Mm-hmm. So
gotta hustle.
Be brilliant. Let people know about it. And while you're not taking no for an answer, figure out a way to not live on your credit card.
Exactly. Please.
That'll shit will come back to bite you in the ass.
Oh, and then some, my friend, and then some. Now, can you tell me what book had the biggest impact on your life or career, besides your own, obviously?
Wow. I guess I would have to say Lord of the Rings.
Okay. Yeah.
I read that when I was a kid, and it took me to a different world. It took me to a different world when I was not a very happy kid, and it showed me the power of of imagination. So I knew even if my world wasn't working out for me, a world in my imagination could. So maybe that's where I should go.
Now, what is the lesson that took you the longest to learn, whether in the film business or in life?
You can't force funny.
Amen. Amen.
You cannot force funny.
Now, what are three of your favorite films of all time?
Godfather,
okay,
Groundhog's Day, and I have a three-way tie between It's a Wonderful Life, Meet Me in St. Louis, and God damn it, Gene Kelly, Dancing in the Rain.
Okay, Singing in the Rain.
Singing in the Rain.
Singing in the Rain. And then just for you.
Wait. Four-way tie.
Uh-huh.
The Sting.
Oh, such a great film. I love The Sting. You see, that's a movie that holds still to this day.
Brilliant.
It's such
because it starts with loss.
Yeah, no,
it starts with death.
Yep.
And
absolutely.
there's death near the end. There's sadness and death.
Now, and I normally don't ask this question, but I have to ask you, three of your favorite screenplays of all time. That when you wrote, comedic stuff that you read, and you're like, Jesus, this is good.
Groundhog Day.
Uh-huh.
But the finished script, not like
right.
Unfortunately, Annie Hall.
Yes, I know. Look, we all apologize for it. It is still a brilliant. He ruined it. He ruined it, but it's still a brilliant piece of art. regardless of the artist.
Every Billy Wilder screenplay ever written.
Pretty much. Absolutely. Anyone listening, if you guys do not know who Billy Wilder is, please do yourself a favor.
How could you not know who Billy Wilder is?
No, there's
there's a indie film hustle.
There's a lot of youngins listening or watching this. Please go watch something like Some Like It Hot. The Apartment.
Some Like It Hot. Sunset Boulevard. Please
go read it. Okay. Now, where can people find you and your work, sir?
They can find me at kaplancomedy.com. Mm-hmm. My Twitter handle is at skcomedy. Mm-hmm. You can find me on Facebook, Kaplan Comedy, or you can friend me. Now I have 3,000 odd, and they are odd, but mm-hmm. I have 3,000 odd friends. Your Facebook cuts you off at 5,000.
So you better hurry.
Another 2,000 come in. I'm stuck. On the other hand, Facebook will steal all your information and sell it to other people, so maybe don't.
Fair enough.
And my books are on Amazon. Although you can if you're in the United States, you can order it directly from me and get an autographed copy.
There you go, Steve.
Which in some markets increases value and in others decreases value.
Fair enough. Steve, it has been an epic interview and conversation, my friend. Great. Thank you so much for dropping some knowledge bombs on the tribe today.
And has anybody ever told you that you remind me of Lin-Manuel Miranda?
No, that's the first one. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. But I've never once gotten Lin-Manuel Miranda.
If you spoke in Cockney a little bit, I think I was watching Mary Poppins Returns.
Listen, I'm a big fan of Hamilton, so I take that with a great compliment. Thank you, sir. A pleasure talking to you, sir.
Thank you. Same here.
I want to thank Steve for coming on and dropping some major comedy knowledge bombs on the tribe today. And I highly recommend his two books, The Hidden Tools of Comedy and The Comic Hero's Journey. I'll put links in the show notes at indiefilmhustle.com/BPS034. And if you want to see Steve live and take one of his comedy intensives, he has all his upcoming dates on his official website, kaplancomedy.com, which will also be in the show notes. And on a side note, guys, I just want to let you know that February 1st, the price of Indie Film Hustle TV for screenwriters and filmmakers will be going up to the regular price of $13.99. So if you have not tried Indie Film Hustle TV, please give it a shot. Just go to ifhtv.com or indiefilmhustle.tv and sign up, because once it goes up to $13.99, it will not go back down to $10.99. So definitely check it out. I got new stuff coming every single week, new interviews, new shows, movies, and workshops. And I got a ton of screenwriting content up there, workshops, movies about screenwriters, series, and so on. So definitely check it out. And if you have not heard, I've written a book. It's called Shooting for the Mob, based on the ridiculously incredible true story of how I almost made a $20 million film for the mafia. And this whole journey takes me through this crazy adventure through the mafia and through Hollywood. I meet billion-dollar producers, huge, monstrous movie stars, and I even meet Batman. And the story is in the book. So you can pre-order the book on Amazon at shootingforthemob.com. And it will be released February 22nd. So please check it out. It means so much to me if you do. This book took me almost 18 years to write. I didn't spend 18 years doing it. I only spent about a year writing it. But it's an extremely personal book, very raw, very in your face, and it's truly an allegory on what not to do when chasing your dreams. And hopefully it will help a few of you out there. So definitely check it out. And that's it for another episode of the Bulletproof Screenplay Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. And as always, keep on writing no matter what. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Bulletproof Screenplay Podcast at bulletproofscreenplay.com. That's BULLETPROOFSCREENPLAY.com.